have any details. Just I appreciate it. I just ran over the wire. Gotta get out of it.
Ready to go.
Hello, everybody. How is everyone today?
Good. Hot.
Awesome. Me too. All right. Well, I will call this meeting to order. And I will start with a roll call. So when I say your name, please let me know that you're here. Commissioner Hilton. Commissioner Reading. Commissioner Nink. Commissioner Crowley.
Here.
Commissioner Ellis.
Here.
Commissioner Collette.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan.
I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And I am still trying to connect to Wi-Fi, but I think that the first order of business then is the rental capacity charges. Is that, am I remembering correctly?
Chair Gravatt, I think we want to start with approval of minutes of the last.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So the first order of business then is an approval of the minutes from our last meeting, and I would entertain a motion.
Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Morgan.
I move to approve last month's minutes.
There's a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Collette. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries. All right, and now we are on to our regular agenda. And the first item on the agenda is the election of a vice chair. So to kick things off, is there anybody who would like to indicate their own interest or nominate a fellow commissioner for the vice chair position?
Excuse me, Chair Gravatt.
Oh, yes.
Just for point of clarification and order on the agenda, as it sits with the agenda, there was a request to approve minutes both from a June 2nd meeting and a June 16th meeting. I believe that the motion that was put forward and passed would be sufficient for the last meeting, which would be June 16th. But I might ask that the chair call for a motion for approval of the June 2nd, 2021 meeting minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Chair.
It looks like then we need a second motion to approve an earlier set of minutes from our last regular meeting on June 2nd. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes from our June 2nd meeting?
I can. I make a motion to approve the minutes from June 2nd's meeting.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Morgan. Do we have a second?
I second it.
All right, and a second from Commissioner Ellis. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries. And thank you for catching that. All right, and now back to where we were after a rocky start. I will open up the floor to my fellow commissioners if they would like to indicate their own interest or nominate a fellow commissioner for the vice chair position.
Chair Cravat.
Yes, is that Commissioner Ellis?
I am going to put my name in the hat. I know that you and I had a short conversation, so I didn't know if it was appropriate that I speak up or if you were planning to speak up about that.
If you are interested, I would encourage you to indicate your interest however makes the most sense to you. So I'll hand you the floor for a minute, Commissioner Ellis.
Okay. I think I would like to learn more about the duties, but I would presume at this time that Vice President would step in when the President is not there. And I'm not sure if there's other duties, but I do have an interest just to help out wherever it is needed. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Commissioner Ellis. Are there any other commissioners who would like to indicate their interest or speak to the interest of Commissioner Ellis?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
there being no further discussion on the matter of the appointment or election of vice chair, I would move to nominate Commissioner Ellis as vice chairman of the Public Works Commission.
All right, there is a motion on the floor to nominate Commissioner Ellis for the position of vice chair. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
And we have a second from Commissioner Collette. All right, is there any discussion of the motion on the floor? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, the same sign. Hearing none, the motion carries, and congratulations to our new vice chair. All right, and now on to the next item on our agenda. I will turn it over to staff for a presentation on part 2 of the rental capacity charges.
Thank you, Chair Gravatt. So Heather Buchanan, our Chief Administrative Officer, is going to make a presentation on the rental capacity charge. And this is more of the administration of how we would actually implement the charge. We talked in the previous meeting about what the actual charge would be. And now there's just the logistics of how do we implement, how long do we allow someone to be under the rental capacity charge concept. So she's got a presentation. Throughout the presentation, we have specific questions that we'd like to hear back from the commission on. The question will appear, we'll have a staff recommendation rather than just kind of letting the question be out there with really no context. We'll have a staff recommendation, and then Heather will open it up for discussion amongst the commissioners. So with that, I will turn it over to Heather Buchanan.
All right, thank you, Steve. So, Chair and Commission members, as Steve mentioned, and you obviously know, last month we proposed a rental capacity charge, a new fee within our overall rate structure for the Water Renewal Fund, and the Commission approved that new fee to be added to our overall structure. And then we also did say that we want to come back and discuss some of the implementation questions with the commission and get feedback on how we should answer those questions. So today, the agenda, I'm going to review a little bit of the background just to refresh our memories on what we talked about last month, discuss each of the questions individually with the proposed recommendation for each. We can change those if you would like. Some of them are pretty straightforward and some of them have a little bit meatier discussion potentially. And then at the end, if everyone is comfortable, we'll ask for a requested motion on accepting the recommendations or modifications as you see fit. So let's start again with the background. As we talked about last month, there are two components of our water renewal financial needs, or basically our revenue needs for our water renewal fund. There's the operation and maintenance side of the house and the capital investment side. So the operation and maintenance side is our day-to-day operations. These are funded by service charges, basically the monthly rates. We send out bills to our customers on a monthly basis. So it's the monthly rates that are paid there, interest earnings. There's also crop revenues and a few other miscellaneous revenues there. On the capital investment side, this is for constructing our facilities, and it's funded by connection fees and also our service charges. So some of those monthly revenues that we receive as well. The portion that we're going to focus on today is a subset of the connection fees. So just a refresher on the connection fees. This is when a new user decides to connect to our system, they're required to pay a connection fee. And that connection fee is proportional to their estimated usage based on flow, BOD, TSS, and ammonia at this time. We'll be changing that structure in the future, but those are the four components right now. And we sometimes refer to this capacity as purchase capacity. So as I talk about purchase capacity through the rest of the presentation, that's what I'm referring to. And there are times when a customer exceeds their purchase capacity, and we'll refer to this as an exceedance. And that's where the rental capacity charge comes in. We either have to determine whether they purchase more capacity or if they rent capacity. So a little bit of background. I have a little fun graphic that I showed last time that's in a slide or so to demonstrate this a little bit. But our city's water renewal system has reserve capacity available so that we can allow for future growth. And occasionally, as I mentioned, customers may exceed the capacity that they individually purchased. So when they do exceed that capacity, they're temporarily using that reserve capacity. Our rate structure historically has only allowed for us to sell additional capacity, but there are times that we don't want or we shouldn't sell that additional capacity. If it's an instance where it's something short-term or a one-time need, if we're selling that additional capacity in those instances, we'll have idle capacity in our system, and that's not a good situation for either our customer base overall or the system itself. So we agreed last month, you approved the idea of a rental capacity charge. So the structure of that, we basically have taken our connection fee, breaking that down to a unit capacity level. So for flow, that's gallons per day. For BOD, TSS, and ammonia, that's pounds per day. So an individual dollar unit rate there, we've assumed a monthly rate of return. And so that bottom line in the table that we're showing there is the rate that you agreed to last month. So how do we determine an exceedance? So you saw this graphic a little bit last month. We have our water renewal facility. The blue portion of the box represents the purchase capacity within our system. And then there's some level of reserve capacity in the system. When we have a new customer, the customer decides they want to come in and purchase capacity. So that's relatively equal to the amount of their flow and loading usage that they have in the system. And then they begin, their facility begins discharging to our system. At the end of each month for our monitored customers, we measure their monthly usage between the flow and the loadings. And when we say loadings, that's the BOD, TSS, and ammonia. And we compare that to their purchase capacity. So if the actual usage is less than purchase capacity, there's no exceedance and we don't need to do anything. If the actuals are greater than the purchase capacity, we have an exceedance. And then we need to determine whether we rent capacity or if that customer needs to purchase capacity. So I've got a couple of examples and kind of format. You saw this one last month, and I've got another example as well. So for this example that we saw last month, a customer came to us in advance and notified us that they were doing some construction on their facility, and there would be a series of months that they would need to exceed capacity. So we determined what we would need to do. And in this case, the customer actually in their contract had a rental clause set up. They're the only ones that at the time did have that clause set up. So we were then able to rent capacity. If it were any of our other customers, we would not have been able to rent that capacity. So the orange line that goes across the middle of the graph is representative of their purchase capacity. The blue bars are showing what their actual usage is each month. So in this case, this is representing their total suspended solids, or TSS. So for the first few months, October through December, they were well under their purchase capacity. But then starting January through August, in this example, that's when they were doing their construction and where they exceeded their capacity. So anything on the blue bar above the orange line is where we were renting capacity with them. Once they completed their construction in September, their usage again dropped below their originally purchased capacity. So on a month-to-month basis, their operational bill, they pay for that full amount of usage for the operation of our facility. But during the months where they were constructing, they only needed to pay an incremental amount to rent that capacity. And as you can see, it would be silly for us to have sold them capacity up to their highest usage, which would have been in February, because on a normal month-to-month basis, they would not need that much capacity. And so this was a construction example. The next example is more of an operational example. This customer does quarterly cleanings of their facility. So they occasionally exceed their capacity. So in May, same situation here, the orange line is their purchase capacity. In May, they slightly exceeded just a tiny amount because of their cleaning. The rest of the time up through January, they were well within their purchase capacity. And then there was I don't recall exactly the situation. It wasn't related to their purchase or to their cleaning, but for 3 months in a row, there was a system issue that they had where they well exceeded their capacity. And for them, the BOD amount that they exceeded, it's not significant for our overall water renewal system, but for their individual system use for their facility, it is very significant. So you can see in April that their usage dropped back down below what they had originally purchased. So for those times when they were above, we could have rented them capacity since we knew it was just a short-term incident. And in this case, we didn't have a rental clause in their contract or the rental fee in place yet. We just had to ignore it and not charge them, which isn't the best situation for any of our customers. So, so keep that operational ideas in mind. There are things like routine maintenance, cleaning of facilities, and occasionally we have an instance where the customer may have on-site pretreatment, and they, due to an operational error in their system, they may still exceed the capacity that they've purchased, which happens off and on. So those are my examples. I think the key things to keep in mind with the examples are the reason for that exceedance, maybe the time or duration that exceedance is going to happen, and then notification period. Notification to our operations staff is very important so that they can handle whatever exceedance or whatever is coming to them in the plant. If they can anticipate that, that helps them tremendously. So now basically we've determined we may have an exceedance. Now what do we do with that exceedance? So here's the first of our questions that we wanted to pose to you, rental versus purchase. So when should a customer have to rent versus purchasing capacity following an exceedance? And our recommendation, the rental capacity charges should be for times when it's an infrequent need, a short-term need, or an isolated incident. Capacity purchase, if there's frequent overages or a known capacity need, like the known capacity need could be if they're increasing their production in their facility. We have various food manufacturers or food producers and other manufacturing companies within our system. So if they're increasing their throughput, it may result in an increased need. So I'd like to get any feedback from the commission on this one, if there's anything else that you might recommend on the rental versus purchase.
And with that, I will ask my fellow commissioners if they have any input on the rental versus purchase discussion as we've had it so far. Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heather, just a couple of kind of quick questions. I think they're quick. How many customers do you think we're talking about here that would qualify or would receive the rental service based on the criteria that you've outlined?
Chair, Commission Member Crowley, we have probably about 9 monitored customers, and that would apply to this initially. The rental capacity charge is set up so that we eventually could apply it to all of our customer base if we choose, but initially it's set up so that we'll be working mainly with our monitored customers. And the reason being is that we need to be able to sample or know the difference between what their purchase capacity is and their actual usage on a monthly basis.
Do you then tend to rely on the customer advising the department as to whether or not they're going to need rental capacity for a particular time frame, or is it something that you said you monitor these customers so you're able to determine on your own that their contract amount has been exceeded and therefore qualifies for additional charges?
Chair, Commissioner Crowley, that's a very good question. It's a little bit of both. We do monitor, so, and that kind of comes to one of our later questions as well. Sometimes our customers don't know that they've exceeded their purchase capacity during the month, and so we will capture that based on our sampling and monitoring that we do each month. And at the end of the month, we'll report back to them that they've exceeded. There are times, though, that our customers know in advance that, for example, the example with the construction, they knew that the work that they were doing on their facility at that time would cause them to exceed their capacity. Or we've had other customers that come to us in advance knowing that they're adding on to their facility more production ability. And so they'll come to us well in advance and let us know that they want to purchase capacity. So those are pretty clear-cut ones. It can happen either way, though, as far as notice in advance or after the fact.
Okay. Mr. Chair, if you'll just indulge me one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And if I'm getting ahead of your presentation, Heather, please just tell me and I'll withdraw the question. I'm wondering about the pricing for the excess capacity or the criteria you have in mind or the basis by which the rental capacity has been determined. It's my perception that the water renewal system is very heavily skewed towards fixed costs, just by the nature of a fixed utility. You invest and you have a certain staffing level. They will not change as a result of variations in consumption or usage that's made of the facility. And so we're talking about capacity here, which is synonymous most of the time in fixed utilities with fixed costs. And so I'm wondering if the rental capacity charge is based on essentially a calculated fixed or capacity charge that's equivalent to what it's actually going to cost or what that fixed unit would cost, and how we recover that.
Chair, Commissioner Crowley, your question is very well pointed and correct, that the charges that we're looking at here are primarily the fixed costs with this, the building of the assets. There is also a component, as I mentioned, as far as the notification that is operational, that is not captured in this fee that we're proposing and considering right now. And we need to talk more as we're looking at our fee structure to see if there's another maybe operational fee that would be paired with this to incentivize our customers to notify us in advance. We've talked a bit internally of that. And I think there are pros and cons of that as well. If there's a fee for a customer providing us advance notice, then they may not want to notify us because they're going to get the fee. And then sometimes after the fact, if the fee is after the fact because we've found it without their notification, sometimes it's difficult to track that back to the user itself. So we need to work out some of those details. I think that there is potential for an additional operational fee to pair with this rental capacity charge, though.
Chair Gravatt, just
Yes.
a clarification on the question. We are basing the rental capacity charge on how we capture the kind of the fixed cost. It's based on a portion of a per SFDU. I think that's SFDE. Sorry, single family dwelling equivalent. So whatever that fixed cost is to recover our investment in the system, this rental capacity charge was based on a portion of that fixed cost. That's what Heather was alluding to earlier on when you pay a connection fee to our system, there's a BOD portion, a TSS, et cetera, ammonia. So I think to answer Commissioner Crowley's question, it is based on fixed costs that we have in the system. So what Heather's alluding to is there's a variable portion as well that we do capture some of in our rates. If they send us more, they pay more, but there's probably a delta there that we probably need to capture as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course. Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you. I was very curious about the short term. I'm wondering what that equals. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what's reasonable to be short term? And I'm thinking like a quarter, so 3 months. I'm just wondering what the thought is on what short term means.
Chair, Commissioner Ellis, your thinking is right on. And if you don't mind, I have got that question in 1 or 2 more slides, I believe. So I think we'll answer that one in just a minute, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hilton.
Hi, sorry, I'm not on video. I can't seem to get it to work for me. So I'm gonna have to do this when you can't see me. But one of the things I'm wondering as we're talking about reserve capacities, and I recognize this is different than the context of capacity that I'm most familiar with, but I'm wondering if there's a minimum level of reserves that we need to have for the system to operate smoothly, or for regulatory reasons, or anything like that. I'm just wondering if, and I guess my question is 2-part, because if there are costs associated with whether there's a minimum level that we have to carry for system reasons or other reasons, then would our intent be to pass those costs along to customers who do exceed their capacity?
Chair, Commissioner Hilton, yes, there is a minimum level of reserve that we are required to have. And I believe that once we reach about 85% of our overall capacity, we're required to start planning for our next level of capacity. So we're doing that already, so that we're required to be able to fulfill the needs of our customers as they connect to our systems. So we have to anticipate in advance and have some capacity available. So we are in progress of that now. But any usage of that reserve capacity to be equitable across all of our users should be, we should recover some form of payment for that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it sounds like there is a level of capacity that reserve capacity that we need, but it's not necessarily that there is a financial penalty that the city incurs or something that happens financially if we exceed that, right?
Chair, Commissioner Hilton, as far as I know, there's not a penalty that we incur by using that reserve capacity. I think that within our NPDS permits, the penalty would be as if we have some sort of permit violation because we've exceeded capacity in some fashion, or we haven't been able to treat the what's been sent to us because of some other exceedance.
Chair Gravatt, just one thing to add to Heather's answer is that the SFDEs, the single family dwelling equivalent, basically the existing capacity charge that we would charge to a home or to a business, that's being updated in our cost of service study. That's coming in the next year or two. So to Commissioner Hilton's point about if reserve capacity is being used and it's causing you to have to build additional capacity, the cost of service study is being updated to account for that additional cost. So that'll be when we adjust our connection fees, the SFDEs, that will be captured in the new investment that's needed for the additional capacity.
I have
Thank you all. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
I have a related question. Are there any particular elements or assets that are the most strained by these exceedances? Or is it just the entire system as a whole?
Chair, I think I'll let Steve maybe answer that one.
Chair Gravatt, thank you for the question. I think it depends on the timing. So as we have this chart that we use, we call it the spaghetti chart, and it's got all of our different system capacities based on what the focus of treatment is. So we have a BOD spaghetti chart that talks about all the different treatment components. And that helps us prioritize which components to add next as we address that issue. So let's say, I don't know, just off the top of my head, so we have a flow issue, a constraint at the headworks, which we have at Lander Street. We're going to add a new headworks at Lander Street. That constraint will then get pushed to the right of our spaghetti chart. We'll show you those maybe in one of our next meetings. Once that happens, some other constraint exists in the system that then we'll eventually have to address to keep that capacity expanding. So typically it is focused for a temporal time on a specific process. That's what prioritizes our CIP. So when we come to you and say we want to start, we need to add a headworks. It could be one, it's an old facility that just needs replacement, or it could be a capacity project, or it could be both. In the case of headworks at Lander Street, it's both. So it does change over time. So there's no specific, like if somebody's sending more BOD, as in some of Heather's examples, it doesn't necessarily specifically strain all the time a certain system, because we may have constraints in certain parts of the system at that time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I have an unrelated question. So looking at this new rental capacity charge starting, are there any instances in which a user has recently purchased capacity where it might have made more sense for them to rent the capacity that they had previously purchased?
Chair, that's a really good question. I don't think so. I think that the example where I had the construction example, that customer, we did have a clause in their contract already. It's been in there historically that we could do a rental charge for them. So had we not had that, we likely would have wanted to sell them capacity to cover that. We didn't sell the capacity. We just rented it during that time. I think for any of the others that have been short-term, we've had to just not sell the capacity, quite honestly. So this fee will help us recover the costs rather than, and we don't have exceedances frequently, I guess, as well. So it's not like every customer's having an exceedance every single month. It's occasionally. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners?
Okay. All right, we'll move to the next question. So then the exceedance level. So this question is like, how much, once we determine we need to rent capacity, how much of an exceedance should require a rental then? Do we allow a buffer so that if there's an exceedance greater than 10%, then we do a rental? Or if it's less than 10%, we can not charge that rental? Or should it be for any exceedance? And the table here shows examples. A small industrial customer, their average daily flow may be 22,000 gallons per day. And so a 10% exceedance for them would only be 2,200 gallons. Where a large industrial user, we have several of these that are roughly 2,000 gallons per day. A 10% exceedance for them is 200,000 gallons. So 10% is very relative in depending on their size. So that maybe is a little bit of a challenge. One other thing to note here is that our city code does allow us to charge for basically any exceedance and determine. So this rate structure will allow us to determine how to charge that. So our recommendation is saying any exceedance. That way we're not putting in a place of having to decide if it's 10% or 5% or whatnot. So I don't know if you have feedback on that or a different suggestion.
Sorry, you said that I have a question. Is it going to create a whole lot more work for the public works folks if we now have everyone, for every tiny little amount, as soon as you're over 10%? I mean, what kind of burden does that place on your staff? And then do we need more funds to staff those positions?
Chair and Commissioner Collette, that's a very good question. We're already doing the work on a monthly basis with these monitored customers to review and compare if they have an exceedance. We do this every month on every monitored customer, and it's a small subset of our overall user base at this point. So it's not creating an extra burden. We have staff in place that's already doing this work. The extra piece would be just charging the fee. We're already doing the calculations to determine the exceedance.
Perfect.
Any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners? I'll just note that I do like the staff recommendation here to keep it relatively equal for the volume, as you've indicated, on overall use of our system. I think that's the best approach. And it doesn't sound like we have any regular residential exceedance for water use.
Chair, that's correct. And that's a good point. I think the way we're looking at it right now, we assume once a residential user connects to the system, there's an average assumed usage there, even though it varies a bit, but we're assuming that average overall. And so we don't charge an incremental difference right now on residential use. That makes sense.
Could you say that last part in a different way?
So most commercial and residential users are not monitored every month. So we don't have a way to, on a monthly basis, know what your residential discharges are. So we're not comparing that back to the actual usage. We do calculate a monthly CCF for the operational fees and charge that on an annual basis. So there's a process that we do for that, but we're not looking monthly to see if there's a variance from that for residential users, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else from the commission? Oh, Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you, Chair Gravatt. I think I was going to say that I was in favor of the recommendation as well. But what went through my mind to kind of get there was I thought, well, let's say we go with the greater than 10% and then eventually go back to any exceedance. I thought that's going to be harder for most people and businesses to go from that to that. So it's better to kind of start with the any exceedance and maybe see how that goes. And that kind of leaves room to change it to a greater than 10% example. So that was kind of a thought process I went through. So I just thought I'd share that.
Chair Commissioner Ellis, thank you for that. That's a good point. And one thing to point out as well is that our customers that are in this category, they expect if they exceed capacity that they do pay for it. So if we were going to something different than that, if we were going to the greater than 10%, that would be different than what they're used to or accustomed to at this point.
Awesome.
All right, let's go to the
Let's
next
go ahead.
question then. So length of rental period, I think this goes back to the previous question. How long can a rental period last? A minimum, obviously, it has to be 1 month. But should it be up to 6 months or up to a year? And after we've done quite a bit of discussion within staff, our recommendation came down maybe 2 points. And so it goes back to those examples that I had at the beginning of the presentation. For something that's operational related, and this would be where, there's a maintenance that they're doing, a short, a small maintenance issue, or they're doing a facility cleaning. Quite often our customers do a quarterly cleaning or bi-monthly cleaning or something like that. Or if there's something that's an operator error, we have one customer that they've had an operator error occasionally, but it takes a couple months for them to get their pretreatment equipment back operating properly. So we were suggesting in this case that it would be up to 3 months, or potentially if there's something completely out of the blue, we could negotiate with them if it's a rare occurrence, but most of the time it would be 3 months. And then for something construction related, the example that I gave where our customer was expanding their facility, or if they're installing additional pretreatment equipment or something that would affect their flows and loadings, we could allow up to 12 months. And the caveat here may be like in our current market, construction is pretty challenging. Getting supplies, we have to order many months in advance. So we may have to be a little bit more flexible on this and one in the short term, but the 12 months in most cases should cover it. We have one customer currently that they're doing construction now and expect it to last for like 18 months. So we would have to make an exception for them in this case, but they're ordering equipment that has a very long lead time. So I'd like your feedback on this one, please.
Any questions or comments from the commission on the duration of the rental period? Commissioner Collette.
Yes, thank you, Chair Gravatt. What's the benefit of having two different lengths of time? Why not just say up to 12 months, and in some instances it'll be 2 or 3 months, and in some instances it'll be 12 months? I mean, is there a benefit in having the two different categories?
Chair and Commissioner or Commission Member Collette, that's a good question. We could simplify it and just say, up to 12 months and then leave that to staff to negotiate. I think maybe the benefit is giving a little bit of sideboard so that we don't want to create a situation where our customers can use the fee to their benefit. This fee is much lower than what they would have to purchase. So I think the sideboards may help us just guide our customers to fall into the right category in the right time frame without it being controversial with between staff and the customer.
Chair Gravatt. Oh, sorry. Just a point of clarification, and Heather, maybe you can confirm this. In most cases where we have an operationally related exceedance, we're finding out after the fact. In many cases on the construction related exceedance, folks are reaching out to us saying, hey, next year we're going to have construction going on. So I think it feels like if folks are going to be proactive on the construction side, and alluding to Heather's comments about just our construction market right now is really difficult, we felt like a 12-month window was reasonable. However, on the operational side, we typically don't find out until after the fact, and we felt like we wanted to be a little more stringent because we don't want those situations to become the rule instead of the exception.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Ellis, did you have your hand up? Okay, Commissioner Hilton.
Hi, I have one question. I'm wondering if we would allow up to 12 months to occur like successive terms, or if we're saying if it's over the 12 months or whatever period we land on, if that would mean that that's not going to be a rental period and that becomes a purchase instead of a rental. And I assume that that's the case, but just wanted to verify.
Chair and Commissioner Hilton, that's a very good question. And I think it depends on the situation. For example, we do have one customer right now that would be in a situation where we know it's going to be 18 months because they are trying to purchase equipment. But once they get that equipment in place, their loadings would drop significantly. So if we were to sell them capacity, once they get the equipment in place, that capacity that we would sell to them would sit idle. Rather than being available to sell to another customer. So I think it would be on a situational basis. And what we were thinking in policy would be that if we were going to exceed something at 12 months, we would go and ask for director approval of that so that it takes it a level above just our staff to make that decision. And our customers then would also be able to acknowledge that it's a special instance that we're allowing that it's not normal day-to-day business.
That makes sense to me. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
I have a question about looking at these two categories. Sort of intuitively, it makes sense, but I wonder if there's a way that you have conjured for defining operational versus construction related in a more formal way so that there wouldn't be any necessarily gray area between the two, or if there are any related policies in other municipalities that have similar codes that we could borrow from for those definitions or for other components of this proposal.
Chair, that's a very good point. So our loose definition right now are the kind of the categories that we noted there. We will, based on the discussion today and the approval of the recommendation, actually be writing a policy so that it's very specific. So in that policy, we can define exactly the caveat around what operational is and construction so that it's very clear. And we can point back to that if there's a question with our customers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from my fellow commissioners? Seeing nothing, I think we can move on.
All right. So grace period then, as we're implementing a new fee, the question is, should we allow a grace period for a certain period of time with the implementation? And initially, the staff discussion was that makes perfect sense. We should, of course, do that. But as I mentioned earlier, our customers that are in this category expect to purchase capacity. So if we're allowing this rental capacity charge, it's actually a benefit to them. And it's also a benefit to our entire system, as we noted, that it helps us to keep our reserve capacity for times when it should actually either be sold or held as reserve. So we felt that the grace period is not actually needed. Our customers will be thankful for having it, and it also benefits us to manage that reserve properly. So we're not recommending a grace period. The alternative is that we're going to be doing outreach to our customers as we implement this fee in the next couple of months. We have several other things that we need to touch base with these customers. And so we'll be including the discussion of the rental capacity charge, what it means to them, how that we'll be working with them if there's an exceedance. So I think the education should cover the difference in the timing of a grace period instead.
Any questions or thoughts related to the grace period? All right, hearing none.
All right.
Up next.
So I think this was also one of Commission Member Crowley's questions. Can the exceedance be noted in advance or in arrears? And I think that we've discussed that it could be either. As Steve mentioned, advance notice is often given to us if we know a customer's constructing on their facility or something like that. Arrears also happen just naturally if a customer is doing their cleaning process and maybe uses extra cleaning product that month, they may exceed accidentally. And so since we treat whatever comes down the pipe to our facility, it's difficult for us to say a notification in arrears, so to speak, is not acceptable. It's hard for us to say that. So we prefer advance notice and want to encourage our customers to notify us in advance, but we feel we also have to accept, I don't know if you call it a notification in arrears. It's not exactly that, or just letting us, we're discovering it in arrears as well. So education, I think, is also the key. We've had recent meetings with our large users just to talk to them about our overall financial plan and what things are coming along that will financially impact them. And it's been interesting, and they appreciate that outreach, and they also feel that it's educational for them and lets them know what we're doing in our system that will impact them. And in turn, then they know what they're doing in their facility and how that may impact us. So it's kind of a benefit there. And I think that will help us to promote the advance notice that we're hoping for.
Any thoughts or questions on advance versus arrears?
Okay.
Seems straightforward.
Seems so. And then I think this is my last question. So if a customer is renting capacity, we wondered if that rental capacity fee should be applied against the cost of a purchase. And in most cases, I think our feeling was no. And that's because the rental capacity is in lieu of actually purchasing the capacity. So we wouldn't want to encourage them to rent and then say, oh, now I want to purchase. We want to make them very distinct needs, and the premise behind the fees is very different. So our recommendation is not to apply a rental capacity charge towards a future purchase. The one exception may be if we have a new customer that's connecting to the system, for example, a brewery, and we're not exactly sure what their flows and loadings will be. We could potentially say, after 6 months of monitoring, we'll determine what your baseline level of flow and loadings are. And then during that time, they would have paid rental to us. We could apply that rental fee towards the purchase. That was our only time that we would potentially consider that. But I don't know if you all feel differently about that.
What are your thoughts, commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think right now, my recommendation would be that it not be applied against the cost of purchase. It's a short-term rental at a very reasonable price that they're getting what they're paid for, what they're paying for. And it, as they move on to firmer service, then they pay the fee that is due for that service, and that the prior payments not be applied against the purchase.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Any other questions or thoughts?
All right.
Hearing none.
So I think we're to the point we can summarize. And so the recommendations that we made, and I think we didn't have any significant changes from them. So feel free if you feel that they're not stated as you want them to be. But we're saying that all exceedances should be charged for, whether it's as a purchase or a rental. In terms of a rental, those should be when we have a short-term, isolated, infrequent situation. In an operational case, that would be up to 3 months. So the short term would be 3 months. Construction related issue would be up to 12 months. We would not have a grace period. We're going to do education instead of that. We will be having advance or arrears notification, I guess you could call that. And then the only time we would allow a rental capacity charge to apply to a purchase is if it's for a very new customer. Any other time it would not apply. Okay. So the motion we're requesting is for the commission to approve the procedures that we've outlined and discussed, but we're open to any modifications if we need to.
All right. So with that presentation and discussion, I would entertain a motion unless there are any other questions for staff. Commissioner Hilton.
Hi, Chair. I don't have additional comments or questions. I just want to thank staff for laying this out in this way. It was really helpful to understand the problems that we're trying to solve, and I really appreciated the additional information and discussion. So thank you. And with that, I would move to approve the proposed rental capacity charge as described in the memo and this presentation.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Mr. Chair, I would second the motion.
Motion and second. Is there any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Great.
Awesome. And thank you for that great presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate your feedback. All right. Thank you.
All right. And that brings us to the next item on our agenda, the Water Renewal Utility Plan Implementation Update. And I will turn it over to staff.
Chair Gravatt, thank you for the introduction. And Haley Faulkner, our Environmental Division Manager, is going to give a presentation on, since approval of the plan in October of 20, staff's been working diligently on identifying the key next steps to lay the foundation for implementation of the plan. What Haley's going to present is less about projects and construction and more about kind of the back of house infrastructure that's needed, like administrative people, process, et cetera. So with that, I'll turn it over to Haley with an update on the implementation of the utility plan.
Thank you, Steve. Chair, Commissioners, thank you for having me today. As Steve mentioned, really a kind of status update of where things are and what's coming and what you'll be seeing more of as we move forward. I thought I'd bring back this graphic. You all have seen a fair amount of this over the last several years, but we talk about this, we've got this cartoon here, but ultimately what I'll be sharing today is how are we going to start making progress towards the implementation of the utility plan. So when we talk about on paper here, a third facility, a recycled water program, aquifer recharge, as well as all of the investment that's occurring in our existing facilities, there's a lot that needs to happen for us to get there. And so this really today is those early activities to implement what's in the utility plan. So that is the backbone of this and our guiding document, but really kind of the parts and pieces of how we get there is what I want to share today. So the next slide is probably not particularly readable, but I can share the document out or point you to it in the utility plan. But it's not readable at all, but that's okay. That's why I have the right side of this, which is intended to say there's really 4 big categories of work that we've been doing. And so that's the people and the processes that exist to get us to where we need to be, the policies that we need to develop, pricing, which is just a nice P word to encompass the work that Heather and her group have been doing on the financial approach, and then the programs and projects. And so certainly over the last several months, you all have heard the most about the last two. So we're knee deep in the pricing. How do we pay for this plan that has been approved, as well as the programs, the Lander Street program work that's been shared, the West Boise program and the Recycled Water program that are in development. So those pieces are ones that have been front and center, but wanted to touch a little bit today, particularly on the processes and policy. We'll be back and kind of looking at the people side, really the staffing needs assessment that was identified in the utility plan. Who and how many folks do we need to be able to implement that? That's really kind of in the next stage of this, not in this early out items. So the first thing I want to talk about is a touch on the policies and pricing. The right graphic here you all have seen before, but it's a really important indicator of why the need for this change. So we're going from that $20 million a year to $80 million a year CIP. And while the big piece for this year is really the how do we fund this, the implementation of the financial plan, which Heather has led and talked about over the last several months. There's also the sort of other pieces of this on how do we get there. And so a few of the components that we've been looking at, of course, today we talked about the policy around the rental rates, so I do not need to belabor that. But we're also developing policies and procedures around things like baseline capacity. So what is the baseline purchase capacity as we move into this financial plan? And what are some of our other policies like reserve capacity, which of course we touched on tonight. So all of these things do thread together. We will see additional policies coming forward through the development of the Recycled Water program as well. A big area of effort, probably the most substantial area of effort in the last 6 months, has been around our capital improvement plan, our CIP process updates. So over the last several years, we've really been working on refining that process and building a process by which we're prioritizing projects that get into the CIP. And what we're doing right now is really embedding kind of those updates, advancing those updates, and then incorporating the work that the programs are doing as well. And so ultimately, when we bring a CIP forward to Public Works Commission and then it gets incorporated into the budget, we want that to have projects that are prioritized across those key areas that we talked about in the utility plan. So we look at capacity, condition, regulatory requirements, and level of service. And we've made tremendous progress in how we do that prioritization, but now to make that leap from where we have been to where we're going on the CIP, we need to institute new tools, new processes, and procedures. And so we've created a team of folks from across Public Works to really come together and dig in and identify where in our current process we need to evolve things. So that's been really fun to get some new folks engaged in this and some new ideas. It is a complex puzzle because of the kind of depth of work that's happening and the changes that are occurring across the organization with the creation of the program. So really working to keep those all advancing together and to keep those puzzle pieces together. So we'll also, over the next year, be working on really the next 6 months, the level of service metrics. So we talked about this in the context of community expectations during the utility plan development. And that's really how do we define and show the community that we're making progress on the things and the areas that they care about. And so what we have right now is the 8 or 9 level of service goals or community expectations, but we really need to determine the metrics by which we'll measure success. So some of those, we may already have that we track in other ways, like miles of collection system pipelines that are cleaned, but we also may want to look at things like water quality criteria and reporting for what's happening on the Boise River so that we can report out, kind of have a river report card. But there's a variety of categories that's really a cross section of the work that we do in the utility, and we'll be diving into what those metrics could be so that eventually we could then bring those back here, report that out, and really have a nice snapshot of how we're making progress, not just on projects that are being constructed or the rates that we have, but also kind of this bigger picture of the whole utility, but bringing those together in one place. And then the last significant update is really on the business case evaluation tool. Really exciting stuff. This is an important tool that we've been using to evaluate from various equipment to big projects to the entirety of the utility plan. So it's a way for us to capture non-monetary risks and benefits and really compare these different areas against each other. And the tool we have right now is complicated, so we're looking to simplify that, but also to reflect then those level of service metrics and make sure that what we have in the tool is again reflective of this whole program. So that is, to Steve's point, really back of house, but really important as we move forward with evaluating programs and projects. And then ultimately, in the next couple of years, we'll do a risk and benefit update on the utility plan as a whole. We talked a lot about the flexibility of that plan and making sure that as we update the risks and benefits, we're still on the same travel itinerary for the utility plan. A couple more big things that we're working on right now. One is a phosphorus treatment strategy. So one of the key points that we talked about this in one of our last PWC meetings is the flexibility that we'll have in the upcoming MPDS permit that has a combined load for phosphorus. And what that does is gives us the flexibility on where phosphorus is removed. And one of the things we're working on now is really defining what does that look like? Where do we want to remove how much phosphorus at which of our systems and when? And so it is proving to be a really fun challenge to tackle, but this becomes one of the immediate baseline conditions for informing the work that the programs are doing and the projects that need to be constructed. So this is happening right now. How do we best utilize the phosphorus removal facility and move forward in a way that balances both the treatment and regulatory need with cash flow and cost constraints. So that's something that's in progress right now, and we'll be making, I guess, substantial progress and decisions over the next few months. And then the last thing, which is new to us in a lot of ways, was we're developing a programmatic environmental document. And so this takes the community engagement that we did and the technical work and really overlays it in the community and in space. And it will serve as the foundational document for any environmental documentation we need for federal or state loan funding. So whether it's an EIS or through the NEPA process, this is a way for us to bring that all together and not have to do individual environmental documents for individual projects, but to create a program document that encompasses everything that's in the utility plan and then have that approved or at least easily updated for any of those funding streams. So this ties back into the financial approach as well as a document that we know we'll need in the event that we do have that bond financing. And so that's kind of the things that are happening right now in addition to the financial approach and the projects and programs. Well, kind of in the short to medium term future actions that we can be back and talk about. Certainly the continued program development and how the programs and the utility work and our projects all intertwine, that is continuing and really has the promise of really streamlining our work and is something that's we're super primed for right now and is going to be really key in delivering that CIP that I showed. I mentioned the recycled water policies earlier. We're certainly not there now, but as we get into the development of that program, those will be front and center. And then we've mentioned affordability and it's tied to the financial approach, but that is another area of continued work for the utility. And just to mention, I think on the recycled water side, we will be back, I think, with more information on that specifically that wasn't included today, but is certainly ramping up in the near future. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Any questions or comments or thoughts from my fellow commissioners? Well, I will just say I'm super excited to continue to be involved in the process of really building out and beefing up our water renewal policies. I'm really excited to do a lot of community engagement, community education, be involved in those efforts and to see all the good we can do for the city of Boise. So thank you for your continued work and continued education of us as we reach out to our communities.
Thank you, Chair. Great. Thank you. You're good.
All right. Now, with that, I think that's it for our agenda requests. I will turn it over to Steve or Director Burgos if you have any other updates for the commission.
Chair Gravatt, just one thing, and then I would open it up to any questions that the commissioners may have on the staff reports that were included, or directors' reports rather, that were included in the packet. Just a congrats to staff. I think there were a couple of commissioners that were able to join us for our climate action roadmap event that we had on the plaza back a couple weeks ago. It's all coming together, running together rather. Just congratulations to Steve Hubble and the team. There was a ton of work that went into that, and on an expedited schedule, and they really did a bang up job on getting that pulled together to a point where we really have some very tangible goals that are set and tangible actions that we're going to take to address climate issues on a wide range of topics. So just wanted to acknowledge staff and the work that they did there. And then I'll stand for any questions that the commissioners may have on the director's reports that were included in the packet.
Commissioners, any questions or comments on the director's reports? Seeing none, I would just second Director Burgos's enthusiasm for the recent climate action event that was super successful. And my fellow commissioners, if you haven't already taken a look at some of the initiatives, I believe that the time capsule is still being built out. So I would encourage you to share out that message and that initiative with your networks. I think that it's going to be a really fun project for us to compare us on the ground doing the work now with the way things look in the coming decades. So highly encourage you to do that. And with that, is there anything else to come before the commission? Seeing none, I would then entertain a motion to adjourn.
Chair Gravatt,
Yes, Commissioner Ellis.
I move that we adjourn our meeting.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, the same sign? And hearing none, the motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your hard work. I would encourage you at our next meeting to, if you are able to, attend in person. I think that in-person interaction is going to help us have some really robust conversations as we continue our work forward. So I look forward to seeing some of you, if not all of you, in person at our next meeting. And I will certainly be in touch.
I don't have my kids. I will be there. So glad. And I was so sorry that I missed the event 2 weeks ago. I was traveling with my new job, but I can't wait to meet you all in person.
Awesome. Well, thank you, commissioners, and I will see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know.